Literati world. Hello, Elin Hilderbrand, The Beach and Beyond book club people. Welcome to my conversation with one of my writer heroes, Curtis Sittenfeld. Curtis is a woman, for those of you who didn't know that. Today we are discussing her novel Prep, and Curtis and I were just sort of like having an aha moment. This was published 17 years ago in 2005. So obviously the world was quite different in 2005. I was pregnant with my third child, my last child. I read this book when it came out. I loved the cover. I loved the concept. I chose it for Literati because I feel like it perfectly fits like The Beach and Beyond, because there are some like sort of beachy aspects to it, but it also has a deeper sort of vein running through. But I picked it on purpose. My favorite of Curtis's books is her novel American Wife. So let me just digress right here and say, if you have not read American Wife, just run to the bookstore as soon as this is over and go get it. It is absolutely a masterpiece. And is one of my top 10 favorite books of all time. And if you have ever read, I list my top 10 favorite books, and what I can't even remember. There was exclusive content somewhere along the way where I talked about it. American Wife, absolutely fabulous. Why did I not pick American Wife, which also would have been really great? The reason is because my daughter, the person I was pregnant with in 2005, is at boarding school. She started this year. She goes to St. George's in Newport, Rhode Island, and she's having a wonderful time. Navigating the social landscape at St. George's has been like an adventure along the line of like a Netflix series every single day on the phone. I literally talk to her probably 4 or 5 times a day. I know all the gossip. I hear it all. And so Prep was newly interesting to me. And I thought, I want to reread it. And so, Curtis, my first question is, what inspired you to write Prep?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ellen. This is such a delight. Thank you so much for choosing Prep. And it's so funny hearing you talk. I'm like, I think that you should write like Prep Mom or Mother of Prep or something like that. Like it could have like the rest of the outfit besides the belt. So it's so funny because I mean, as we were saying, like it does feel like it came out sort of in another lifetime in so many different ways. But it was my first novel. I was 29 when it was published. I think back on it and I think like I had this sort of I think you have to be a little delusional to be a novelist. And I think that there's kind of a movie version of that we maybe a lot of us have in our head of what it'll be like when our first book is published and like the world will care or pay attention. And in fact, shockingly, that happened. Like it wasn't like a foregone conclusion that it would be a bestseller. It was a surprise bestseller, but I was extraordinarily lucky. So in real life, I did attend boarding school. I am from the Midwest. I did attend boarding school. I grew up in Ohio, and I definitely don't think of Prep as autobiographical. Like I am not Lee, the sort of things that happened to her for the most part didn't happen to me. But even when I was a boarding school student, I recognize, of course, there's like a lawnmower outside. So tell me if I should put
no worries. No, it's fine
on or whatever. But I recognized even when I was at boarding school, I went to Groton in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I recognized this is such a insular, intense environment. And especially, I mean, social media didn't exist then. So you really were kind of isolated. And there's like extreme privilege. There's extreme youth. There's all these like hormones. There are sort of unspoken tensions around class and money. And so it just always felt like the question was almost, instead of like, why would I write a novel about boarding school? It's like, how could I not?
Right. No, totally. I 100% agree. So many questions. Because I'm like sort of living at present moment. When you went to Groton, first of all, was it in the book, Lee is very self-motivated. She goes to boarding school to alt, and she doesn't her parents really don't want her there, and so she decides on herself that she wants to go. Was that the case with you?
I think the short answer is not really. So it was less of a culture shock for me. I'm one of 4 siblings. I'm the second. So it's 3 sisters and then a brother. I'm the only one who went to boarding school. And as it happens, I was the worst student. Some people are like, oh, were you gifted? So you had to go away. And I was like, no, actually not. I wish. But on the one hand, I mean, I had gone, my siblings and I went to private school. So,
Okay.
Obviously
And you grew up in St. Louis. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. I lived for much of my adulthood. I lived for 11 years in St. Louis, and I now have lived in Minneapolis since 2018. So I am a Midwesterner. But it was more like, it's funny because, of course, I'm now 46, and the older I get, like, it's this story of how I went to boarding school kind of changes in my own. Someone from the admissions office of Groton came to Cincinnati to give a kind of presentation, and my parents took one of my sisters and me. And my dad would say, oh, it was just to kind of expose you to the idea of boarding school, almost like the way you take your child to a museum, which I kind of feel like, okay, bullshit. I think so. I think my dad was kind of enchanted with the idea, and I think my mom was less so. But that night, it happened. My family was the only people who showed up, and I became smitten with the idea of boarding school. Sort of the way you might become smitten with a person. And so I applied, and again, I wasn't such a great student that it was clear I would get in, but I then did.
I'm waving to my lawn guy. Okay, but then you did. Okay, so off you go. And obviously Lee, so like in the second reading of the book, I guess 17 years later, what I just like re-experienced, like Lee is so uncomfortable in her own skin, like in her own skin, and then in the environment. As I'm reading along, all I want is for Lee like to get some moxie and for Lee to get some confidence, which she does incrementally over the course of the 4 years that she's there. And I want to say it's so difficult to write a novel that takes place over 4 years and have it have any kind of continuity. And you do such a beautiful job. And yet the stories, like my favorite stories, like obviously the story with Little Washington is so cringy and upsetting. And then the other story that stays in my head is the freaking game, which is called Assassin in this book. So I finished reading this. Shelby, my daughter, calls me. She's like, we're playing a game called Paranoia. And I'm like, oh my God, that is the same book. That's the same game that was in my book. So did you guys play Assassin at Groton?
Yes, Groton played it. And in fact, up as recently as a few years ago, they still did. So again, I don't, I might sound like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth. I don't consider the book autobiographical, but the setting is very similar to Groton. The rituals, the schedule, the layout of the campus. Yeah, and I definitely,
Of course, I mean, of course, right?
But also the schools, all these sort of elite prep schools, boarding schools are often very similar to each other. So when the book came out in 2005, people would say to me, readers would say, clearly you did research and based this on Deerfield or based this on Choate, or like in my, prep school, we had the same list of, distinguished alumni's names carved into the wall in the dining hall, or we did the same kind of ritualistic thing. And it's like, no, actually the schools are very similar to one another.
They are. I mean, I took Shelby to Tabor and to St. George's, but the things that I know, like the fact that they play Paranoia, I mean, I'm glad they don't call it Assassin anymore, but like that would be so 2000, like, or this is actually set. So let's get the timeline right. This comes out in 2005. This is not set in 2005. This is actually set in 90s.
It's deliberately vague. I think of it as like 1987, 8, 9, 1990, barely 90s, but maybe.
Right. Gotcha.
Kind of in a timeless pre-social media era.
I mean, that is so true. And I just kept thinking to myself, and of course, because of Shelby, like I just kept thinking to myself, because if Shelby wants to show me somebody and talk about somebody, she just shoots me their picture. Or we want to look at prom dresses and like, what did people wear to prom? Like she screenshots and sends them to prom.
By the way, wait, I have to tell you, this is something that's in the book. I mean, for an entire dorm, there would be one payphone off the common room. And so if your parents were trying to reach you, they would call, and either the dorm was empty and it rang like 20 times,
right.
or like maybe they'd try to call and someone was having like a 3-hour conversation, with their best friend from home. Or like it was, I mean, I would say, I don't know how often I talked. I don't know if I talked to my parents even once a week. Yeah.
Right. No, right. Exactly. I mean, it's so different from the way it is now. And it was really, really remarkable. Okay. So like she hooks up with Sugarman with,
Crush Sugarman. Yeah.
In the, this is like the greatest thing. She's hooking up with Crush Sugarman, like in the room for the day student on the sleeping bag. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it would, but I mean, just to talk a little bit about sex and boarding schools, I don't know if any of my readers want to hear this, but I mean, it definitely happens, right, Curtis? I mean, it's happening at my daughter's boarding school for sure. They have something called intervist, which is when their kids are.
It was called intervis at Groton. That's so funny.
Yeah. So I mean, things are definitely. I mean, you have to have the door open, but I mean, is it really anyway? But I loved that detail of them meeting in this room. But I'm like, would they not get caught in this age? Like, wouldn't somebody see them like call it a sneaky link or going in there and like have it on film? I mean, there are so many ways in which, in theory, we were safer, I think, our era going to high school.
It's funny. I mean, I can't even fathom going to high school during social media. Like I think it almost scrambles my brain. And I think there's like pros and cons to everything. Like I think there are ways that it's probably much harder to be in high school now. I think there are maybe some ways it's easy. You can kind of like, because TikTok or YouTube or whatever exists, you can kind of get a sense, like even if you're at a high school and you're like, I'm really weird, but you can still find other people like yourself out there. Like they exist, even if you don't go to school with them. So I think, I don't know. I mean, it definitely seems unmistakably like a very different time.
Right. And people are much more open to concepts that like basically didn't exist. I'm not sure there were any openly gay people at my high school. I went to public site. I went to like the most middle class, middle of the road, nothing special public high school. I got a fine education, but it was nothing like this. But I don't think there were any openly gay people in my high school in I graduated in 87. So like in the mid 80s. So I think I think from that perspective, like the world is just changing. It's changed now. Okay. I want to get to we are zipping along here. I want to get to the questions that the people asked on the app. So somebody asked, did the prep school theme come first or Lee's character? And I think I know the answer because you sort of touched on it.
Oh, that's interesting. I think I would say the prep school setting. And then to me, a fish out of water story is always sort of irresistible because then that fish can like notice the weird customs of the setting. Whereas if somebody is kind of it or feels very, like they fit in, then they might not notice as much.
That was absolutely the case. And I loved how Lee like literally notices everything, has everybody cataloged, like knows everybody's, because she's like so trying to find her place. And one of the ways she finds her place is by figuring out where everybody else is. And the extreme attention, which I love in anyone's novel, the extreme attention to detail is so prevalent here. And I really felt like I knew Aspeth. I mean, Aspeth, oh my God, what a nightmare. And the name is so perfect. Aspeth Montgomery. I mean, it's so perfect. Okay. Another question. And I thought that was right because you were like, how could you not write about it after having gone there? The question is, do you think this could have been set in a public school?
I mean, certainly many like juicy novels could be and have been set in public schools. So I think it depends which part of it you're talking about. Like, everyone, like people always have sort of strong feelings, and like they feel embarrassment and they feel lust and they feel self-consciousness, and so those are the only feelings I'm familiar with. No, just
Right.
kidding.
Yeah.
Or the only feelings I write about. But so I think you can write about those in any setting. I think Prep is a novel about boarding school. That's sort of its
Yeah.
defining feature.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that Shelby points out to me is that they live together. So there is a deeper understanding of the people that you're in school with than there are when you go to high school. I didn't really know a lot, if you think about it, about the people I went to high school with. I wasn't brushing my teeth next to them. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah.
We weren't living together. We weren't like doing, I don't know. The way she described it was very interesting. Like they just know everything. They see each other breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and nighttime, and not only your roommate, but the people in your dorm and the sort of population at large. Like things about them that you do not know about the people that you go to public school with.
Yeah, I think I like that because I try to write about characters who are, complicated the way real people are complicated and are not necessarily super likable or super unlikable. Like that's always a subjective assessment anyway. But I think that the more environments the characters can interact with, the more there's an opportunity to be like, oh, this person is like a show off in class, but is actually really nice when you're brushing your teeth side by side, or
Right.
vice versa. Yeah.
Right. Oh my gosh, I thought it was so well done. All right. Next question. Okay. What do you see Lee doing as an adult? There's a way in which, Curtis, we have little bits of Lee as an adult, right? Like peppered throughout the book so that we know she survives. They're like little glimpses or little teensy tiny. I should have marked them, but I didn't. But little aside. So what do you see her doing as an adult?
It's funny. Well, I think in some ways when there's a sort of unanswered, like factually unanswered question, I feel like the reader can fill it in. Like she can be whatever you want her to be. But
Right, yeah.
I think that she is someone where, as you point out, she's so like kind of self-sabotaging and kind of can't get her act together for all 4 years. But I think it's really possible that that's sort of like her super messy, awkward phase, and then she's fine. Like like to be a mess in high school doesn't mean that that's like the end of your story. Like then you're 18, and then like other thing, like hopefully you have like 50 years or 70 years more to live, and to be a kind of a person who maybe has your act a little bit more together. So I think that she's kind of her worst self in boarding school, and the reader is like privy to all the specifics of her worst self.
Right. The nice thing is, I mean, I definitely think she learned a lot. So like not just in the classroom, obviously, but she learned a lot about life, and I think she goes forward and is very successful. I see her as a lawyer or an editor. I mean, I look back on my high school years and I'm like, oh my God, I was in the marching band. I mean, go there. I mean, nothing that would have said, who I am today. Like nothing. I was not an athlete. I played the clarinet. It couldn't have been any dorkier. I mean, I was like smart in English, and it just couldn't have been any. It was just so. But you grow up, and then once you become an adult, you can decide what kind of person you want to become, and it really can change. Okay, we are going to run out of time. I'm like freaking out already. Okay, this is a question that I actually had. The parents' weekend. There are a lot of cringy moments and like uncomfortable moments. For me, the worst was when her parents come to visit. Everybody on this Zoom has finished the book. So her parents come to visit. She is sort of feeling more like a boarding school kid. And it becomes very apparent that she is like sort of settling in when her parents come. She is so embarrassed by them, and her parents are so sort of charmingly Midwestern, like very, oh God, I just loved the representation. But then, of course, at the end of the book, there's a big rift and it's not resolved. And what made you, why no resolution, blah, 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 blah. Can we talk about that?
Well, again, I think there is, for Lee, there is this sort of socioeconomic tension between, you know, how she was raised and the world that she's now living in, which I think is very, you know, common for a lot of people who go to elite schools. And of course, many more people go to elite colleges or universities than to boarding schools. But it's sort of, you know, the most, I think that the Parents' Weekend is the most intense encapsulation of that tension, where it's just sort of like she's kind of recognizing she always had a relatively warm relationship with her parents, and that she now sees that they seem unsophisticated through the eyes of her classmates, and she's at her like peak of self-consciousness, and so again, I mean, I'm sure that you know this very well, but I feel like I'll often say, like, I think that things that you want to avoid in real life, like conflict, you really want in fiction, you know, like it kind of keeps it moving. So again, like for her to have a showdown with her dad feels both plausible, but it also, it's like, I mean, this is a novel. It needs a plot. It needs to happen.
Yeah. It was really great. And the New York Times at the end, I mean, it was just so, wow. So dramatic. Anyway, Prep. It is an all-time classic, Curtis. What can I tell you? I want to shift gears. We've got like 8 minutes left. I want to shift gears because one of the things that you and I share, which we have never, this is actually our first conversation face to face. Although I will say Curtis and I are on a very high-powered women writer text stream with some other very, very famous people. But it's our first conversation.
I said to Ellen before this started, I was like, I sometimes brag to people that I'm the least successful writer by far on the lady writer text chain.
That is just not true, because of course, so much great work. But one of the things that you and I share is that we both went to the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about on Literati is how much I hated Iowa and how miserable I was and how Frank Conroy told me I would never be published. And so I'm curious, like, can you talk a little bit about your Iowa years?
So it's funny. I mean, first of all, I think that you're not alone. Like, I think many people, you know, it's a 2-year program where you're just writing fiction, getting feedback. And I don't know, I feel like, I think probably there's a very different vibe or tone now than when I graduated 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. But I think that many people graduate from there feeling very bruised, like they've been their work has been, which is very close to their heart for all of us, has been explicitly criticized in a way that feels very personal and very discouraging. And, you know, like maybe professors or classmates' voices, comments, criticisms echo in your head for years. So I think it's not weird to feel that way. I was super lucky. I had a very positive experience. Not to say, I think there were, you know, people who didn't like my writing, people who gave me negative feedback, people who didn't like me. But I mean, I made super close friends, again, not with everyone, but with the people that I was friends with. And I just found it really stimulating and thrilling that, like, you know, you could say, like, just in life, if you say to someone, you know, have you read such and such novel? Unless it's like a bestseller, and unless the other person's a writer, the answer is probably no. But in Iowa, it's very plausible. Like, it could be like some, you know, book, some short story collection that came out from a small press 8 years ago. And the person's like, oh yeah. And then you can have like this really intense conversation about, you know, sentences and structure and character development. And I loved that. Like, it was just, so I felt really, and again, I am Midwestern. So I think there are some people who think like, what am I doing in Iowa? And I was sort of like, I'm in my place. So, and I felt like I learned a ton. Have you ever crossed paths over the years with Ethan Kanan?
Oh yeah. So Ethan was there when I was
Oh,
there.
was he a student or a teacher?
He was a teacher.
Oh, okay. Okay. No. He was
He,
a baby student. He went when he was like a baby. So I didn't
yeah,
like,
no, I know. He was a teacher. His children. So just to give you perspective, I think his wife was pregnant. He had a baby or like a toddler, and like
yeah.
he had like a toddler and like a newborn.
Oh, yeah.
And let me tell you how much I loved Ethan. I loved Ethan so much that I didn't have him for workshop, but I had him for literature class. And he did a class on the long story or novella, which was to this day,
I took that class.
to this day, like the best my best educational moment was the 2 hours that I sat in that class. And I can remember thinking, to your point earlier, I can remember thinking, I am now in a room with the smartest people I will ever know. That is how I felt. Like, and nobody knows it. Like, nobody in the world knows it. But in this class in Iowa, discussing the novella and long story with Ethan Kanan and the people in my class, we are the smartest people anywhere in the country right now. Like, I felt so like this is so rarefied. And I used to make, this will surprise no one, I used to make appetizers and like hors d'oeuvres and bring them to Ethan's class because it was like 3 to 5 or 4 to 6. And so, and I was a cook and, an at-home gourmet, and I would like make appetizers and bring them to the class. And Ethan is like, you're so great, Ellen, thank you so much. And then I hand wrote him a cookbook of all of my best recipes and gave it to him at the end of the semester. That is how much I love the man. I just was absolutely like, I was in love with him and just like thought he was a fabulous writer and like the greatest person. So
it's so funny. You should have him on here. I adore Ethan. I feel the funny thing is I actually one time he was actually even teaching a novella workshop and convinced us that whoever's work was being discussed should bring snack for everyone. So maybe you were the inspiration. I remember I made a lasagna one time, but the thing, it's so funny. The thing that I feel about Ethan, so he was my advisor. I took, I think, 2 workshops and 1 seminar with him. And I feel like he gave me this incredible educational gift, which was to think about fiction in terms of structure. And I feel like literally for 20 years, I'll talk to other writers and I'll be like, okay, this is what Ethan Kanan says about structure. And this will give you control over your writing. And then like, you'll know how to write forever. And like, you're good. And so it's like, I feel this incredible gratitude that I, went to Iowa, that I was Ethan's student. I have like a super close friend I'm in contact with almost every day. Susanna, she and I were the only women in our workshop the first semester. So wow. I really feel like I benefited in very concrete ways from attending the workshop.
Okay. And actually, the nice thing is that now actually, as I'm thinking about it, like the statement you made about like somebody who's like read the last story in the New Yorker and what did you think? And like, we all voted to have like, who could we have come read? If we could have anybody come read, who would it be? And it was Lori Moore. I mean, of all people, but we all wanted Lori Moore because Lori Moore was the writer's writer. And
oh yeah, of course. Was like, you want Lori Moore.
Amazing. And be like overwhelmingly. And I'm like, who else in the world would pick, like, you could have anybody, and we picked Lori Moore and she came.
Lots of people love Lori, but yeah, there is something like again, or even the thing that I sort of loved was like, people could be out at a bar and then someone would almost be like, oh my God, I know how to end my story. And like, take off running. And it was normal. Like, it was just like, I feel like writers in general are just, including you, are just fun to talk to. Like they're weird and interesting and they notice things and they have opinions and they're not afraid to share their opinions or be weird. And I like that.
Right. That's so funny. All right. We have 1 minute left. Curtis, what are you working on?
Ellen, I turned in a novel yesterday, which I do that much less frequently than you do. So
that is so exciting.
It was a big occasion. I mean, who knows? I don't know if it'll come out in like a year or what, and I'm too nervous to say, but the thing I'll say about it is I wanted to write like a short, fizzy, fun book. And I kind of succeeded. I don't know.
I'm so excited. Does it have a title or?
I don't know. I can't say. I don't know yet. But I think it's supposed to be short and fun. Fingers crossed.
I am so excited. And for anybody, it's 12 o'clock. For anybody, please read We've all read Prep. Read American Wife. Rodham. What else? Oh my God, your fabulous book about the Bennett sisters.
Eligible. Thank you, Ellen. This was so fun.
I've read them all. Man of My Dreams. I have Sisterland. I have read them all.
We should go back to Iowa together, and you have a cleansing.
I know. We should definitely do that.